Welcome back to Peacock Alley. We're here hosting the legislature today. Dale Wetzel, and this is Gary Eminence filling in for Scott Hennon, who went back to Fargo sick tonight. So
he's sick as a dog.
Sick as a dog, and he is listening to us. So be very careful, Dale, what you're saying. I noticed, by the way, you didn't.
Oh, he is listening to us. So then I'm really going to pile it on.
No, I did notice that.
I'm glad that you're not here, Scott.
Speaking of the show on Saturday, I noticed when you had the Colonel in, and you didn't talk about your speeding ticket you got on the way to the show on Saturday.
Yes, I did.
Not today, you did.
Today? Well, you want me to?
Well, you had the law enforcement's all left. So
yeah, this is true. I should have mentioned it. Before we had a group of gentlemen talking about the speeding fines in North Dakota and how they might be going up. And last Saturday, I acquired the first speeding ticket I've had in a number of years. I was going down 7th Street in Bismarck this is according to the policeman. I'm not admitting anything. But according to the policeman, I was going down the street at 37 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. And so I'm going to have to pony up, unless I decide to fight this, I'm going to have to pony up the princely sum of $12 to Bismarck City Municipal Court and probably have a point against my driver's license, too.
So what the reality is, if the new law goes into effect, your fine might have been $75 or $80.
I don't think it
might have slowed you down a little bit.
I don't think it would have been that high.
Okay.
To be honest with you, it wasn't. I was just not paying attention to what I was doing. I was late, and I was driving on 7th Street. And the speed limit there is 25. Frankly, the speed limit there is too low.
I think it is too low.
But as far as what happened in the legislature today,
let's get to that.
Let's get to that. We had a number of bills on guns. On gun regulation. The principal one that folks were paying attention to would allow folks with a concealed carry permit to have a gun in a church or school if they had permission from the school board or the principal or the pastor of the church. And there were some objections to some of the language in the bill. First of all, school boards and teachers and school administrators, and I'm talking about the organizations that represent them, they're not thrilled about the idea of having guns in their schools as long as they're not wielded by someone who is not someone who's a policeman. What they would prefer, their preferred option is, please give us some money so that we can hire resource officers who are basically trained in law enforcement and carry weapons to provide security in our schools rather than having a civilian who may or may not be trained in the use of firearms, who has a concealed weapons permit and a gun. Instead of giving a teacher a gun, you have a resource officer there who is trained in the use of deadly force. That was their attitude, and they also were concerned about increased liability from having people in the school with guns. As far as the churches were concerned, there were people there, in particular a minister from Williston, who said that he thought that this was a good idea, that it would help preserve life rather than endanger it. And he said that he has a congregation in Grassy Butte that has actually asked for, is advocating the option of having congregants carry guns.
I'm putting a truck stop in Grassy Butte. That's making me nervous when they're carrying the guns in the church there, Dale. So that'll put a little heat on guns in Grassy Butte. So
I'm sure there's plenty of them, and I'm sure there's plenty of them that are concealed. In fact, I'm sure there'll be a lot of them in your establishment once it gets built. You just hope that they're not intending to do you any harm. I was also following a bill that would decrease the gasoline tax from 23 cents to 11 cents a gallon. That's gotten quite a lot of opposition, and I don't think it's going anywhere. The argument for it was that it would provide, starting in July 1st, instant tax relief because you're paying 12 cents less per gallon for fuel. But then there also becomes the issue of, would you even notice it given the natural fluctuations of fuel prices? And also, would you have any assurance that the person selling you the fuel is passing along this gasoline tax increase, or are they just going to put it on their bottom line? There was a couple of, and there was, it should be mentioned, on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, there was an abortion bill. It would make it a misdemeanor for a doctor to perform an abortion strictly for sex selection or to eliminate a fetus with a genetic abnormality. and the committee hasn't, House Human Services Committee hasn't done anything with that bill yet, and it's gotten some opposition in that some genetic abnormalities apparently do not allow for a live birth, and there's a question: should you require a woman to carry a child to term who has no chance of survival? That was one of the arguments that we heard about that. The other argument that we heard in favor of it is that it's frankly a despicable practice to have an abortion because your child is a boy when you wanted a girl, or if the child has a genetic abnormality, maybe it's not serious. I don't. Anyway, that will eventually come to the floor of the House for a vote. But what we're going to spend most of our time discussing here tonight is financial literacy. This is our spot where we have a sponsor. It's the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. They represent credit unions in North Dakota and South Dakota, as you might guess by the name. And we're going to be speaking about financial literacy, the efforts of credit unions to promote financial literacy, and the importance of financial literacy amongst young people, and frankly old people too, like old people like me. You know, I'm financially probably semi-literate.
You're never too late to learn.
This is true. This is true. And you know, since I don't have any money, I kind of wonder about whether it's important to be literate about something I don't have. But we will we'll take on faith that this is a good thing, whether you have money or not.
Well, we'll help those listeners, Dale. So
yes,
all those listeners that are out there with all that money.
Of course,
there you go.
Yes,
Since you and I don't have any, we'll do it for the listeners.
Absolutely.
How's that?
Oh yes, you're just as poor as a church mouse, Gary Ameneth. We have with us tonight, we have Shannon Webster. She's the Vice President for Marketing of Town and Country Credit Union in Minot. And we have the North Dakota State Treasurer, Kelly Schmidt. She was re-elected last year, and she has made financial literacy one of her job responsibilities during her time in office. We also have the President and CFO of the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, Mr. Robbie Thompson. Welcome, everyone. And Treasurer Schmidt, I'll start with you. What is it that credit unions are doing, in your experience, to promote financial literacy, and how does this dovetail with what you're doing in your office?
Well, I think there's a huge partnership going on across the state of North Dakota and across the nation, not only from credit unions, but other financial institutions, private sector, private-public partner relationships that are happening, and government affairs also are getting involved, because we all realize that the more our people know about their finances, the better employees they are, the better citizens they are, and the stronger states that we have.
Mr. Thompson, how does your organization promote financial literacy?
Well, as our philosophy is a people helping people philosophy, and that's really what we've been chartered to do. And part of that is making sure that our members understand what it is that they're getting into, understand the basics of checking accounts and of loans and of interest and compounding interest and budgeting. So each and every transaction that we are involved in, it has that kind of component to it. But also we do hundreds of hours of education that we actually provide in the classrooms. We help with the Jumpstart Coalition, which is a statewide and a national-wide organization that brings resources to financial literacy. And we're frequently developing new curriculum, new materials. We have a foundation as well that's a nonprofit foundation that actually is tied to financial literacy to try to improve that. We want people to understand checking accounts, understand the basics of budgeting, and we know that the statistics that we can talk about a little bit, they're not favorable in terms of basic knowledge that people having.
What statistics are you referring to?
Well, I think there's a number of them, and I know that Treasurer Schmidt also can highlight some of those. But I mean, as an example, in the last year we have 20% of the people in North Dakota that actually spent more than they actually make. Now, I understand for the federal government that's okay these days, but for individuals that's not a positive thing for them to be exceeding their total income with what they're paying. We also have 62% of the individuals in North Dakota, this is from a recent study, that says that they lack any rainy day fund. to have those problems. So more than half of the people in North Dakota are one catastrophe away from having a serious financial crisis. And those are things that probably have been developed over time because, you know, we learn in schools and we learn from our parents, and if those traits are not there, those opportunities are not there, they just, you know, it continues that pattern and that cycle throughout people's lives.
Do you think that folks don't have a rainy day fund because they don't understand the importance of having one, or they just can't afford to have one, or they perceive that they can't afford to have one?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I really do. I think that people don't understand how important it is to try to put that away. But I mean, to have that number be that high in North Dakota, and the only state in the country that's doing this well economically, really, I think that if we were to see that in other part of the country, that number would be even higher, and that's really, you know, disturbing.
Ms. Webster, in your business, how and when you think about financial literacy and actually try to promote it, what sort of knowledge do you assume that your audience has about financial literacy, or do you assume that they have any knowledge?
We usually start out assuming that they don't have, you know, even the basics. You know, you start with those building blocks of learning about savings and what a checking account is and how you can save and the power of your savings, and then you just move on from there. So we always start with the basics, and a lot of that we specialize in, or that we've focused on, is youth financial literacy. So we're really starting with those building blocks and growing from there.
Okay, you say you start with the basics. Tell me what the basics are. Just talk to me like that I know nothing about personal finance, which is not that far from the truth.
Well, one thing that we like to talk about is needs and wants. You know, there's a big difference between saving the money and spending it on things that you need, or just blowing your money on the things that you want. So, I mean, even in junior achievement, when you go in and teach at the classrooms, one of the first lessons for the first graders is what's a need and what's a want. So setting those two apart and starting to save for those things that you want and paying for the things that you need now.
And how do you get kids to grasp the difference between needs and wants?
You know, they catch on quick. Kids get those kind of things, you know, housing, shelter, food, clothes, you know, those are things you need and you have to have, and they understand that pretty good.
How do you try to teach them savings?
You know, they're actually better at it than I think you'd probably assume, I guess. For the kids, you know, we always bring piggy banks or different things along and teach them. You know, there's always the philosophy of the spend, share, save, you know. So the share would be your donating, that you take a portion to donate, a portion to share, and a portion to save. And a portion to spend, sorry, not share. So it's pretty good.
What do teens, Treasurer Schmidt, you're looking at a piece of paper that says what teens know about money. Can you tell me, what do teens know about money?
Well, most of them know the difference between a credit card and a debit card, and they know about, you know, discussions, but they don't know. What they don't know is they don't know how to necessarily get their credit card balance, or to get their you can't go to an ATM machine and ask for a balance inquiry and expect that to be the balance you have in your checking account. And we have those disconnects. And I think that's part of it. But the other part of it is our teens and young people do not understand the consequences of their actions long term. I mean, today, not only is balancing your checkbook important, that you have the dollars that you spend, but it affects the interest rate that you're going to get on a mortgage someday or on a car loan. It could possibly affect whether you get a job or you don't get a job. And it also affects the premiums that we pay for our insurance rates nowadays. They look at those FICO scores, and they look at our behaviors and how we handle our dollars, and they affect many different aspects of our life that most people don't know.
What is a FICO score?
The FICO score is where they look at the different credit ratings, and they bring together a composite score of how we manage our money. And most folks have a specific number that they look at. You know, over 720, I think right now is the going rate. You want to get over that number to get the optimum rates that you can get on different loans and credit card offers. But the fact is, people do not understand that the consequences of our decisions today.
You mentioned the term checking account's been used more than once here. Do young people have checking accounts? I mean, do they have books of checks and write out checks, or how do they? What is the concept of a checking account in this electronic age we have?
I think it's really about the debit card for the most part. A lot of credit unions have set up a share account. I think that's what you do at Town and Country, and they set up a share account, and then they give access to a debit card. Some of them have restrictions to their parents have to have access to that as well. And generally there's limits on how much they can withdraw and some other caps on there to make sure they don't do the wrong thing with the debit card. But that's I think generally, Shannon, how you set it up at Town and Country.
You mentioned share accounts. What is a share account, please?
To be a member of a credit unions are member-owned. So to join a membership with a credit union, you purchase a share, which is just you put $50 in a savings account, and we just call it a share account. So it's a savings account, and then you can also have a checking account too. So we just call them share accounts.
Well, and traditionally, Dale, our young people not only have credit cards, but many of them have car loans before they graduate from high school. Many of them have a line of credit or a ready reserve stuck to that checking account. Many of them are beginning to save as they're preparing to go to college, and they're setting aside funds for that. Some young people are jumping right into that world of working, and they finish high school and they're making decisions whether they should participate in a 401k program or not participate. And that's why it's so important that we get these folks at a younger age to get them started in that developmental process of thinking what's best for them.
What's sort of the core advice that, I'd like all three of you to address this question, what is the core advice that one should give to, say, a teenager, someone who is maybe just on the cusp of being old enough to get a job, to own a car, to make certain financial decisions? What is it that what basic things should they know about managing their finances?
Well, the first thing that we try to teach, or I've tried to teach my own children, is the needs and wants conversation. Making sure that they set aside a rainy day fund, whether it's a couple $100 just in case you have an oops in your subtraction. And just because you have a debit card doesn't mean you don't keep a register to determine how much money you have in that account. So accountability, making sure they know the resources that they have available at their financial institution to go in and ask questions, and making sure that they know all their different options and they ask lots of questions as they're making decisions. And probably the most important thing is it's okay not to be like everybody else.
And I think that the treasurer hit on this earlier, but consequences and what that really means. Many young adults or teenagers don't understand compounding interest and how that impacts you. The idea that if you're paying higher interest, how much of a difference that is. A difference of 1 or 2% on a $200,000 home can be $100,000 over the life of that mortgage, and I don't think people quite understand. They can make $150 difference in your payment each month by getting a different interest rate. And if you do have a negative credit score, only 38% of people in the United States, in the last survey that I've seen, actually get their free credit report, not from Free Credit Report, but from annualcreditreport.com, where it's actually free. They get to get their credit score and be able to look at that, and they see so many things that happen on there. If they're not paying attention to that can impact their credit score. And when you come into the credit union or you go into another financial institution and your credit score is 680 as opposed to 540, that's going to make a dramatic difference in the interest rate that you're going to get in most institutions.
If you have a 540 score, you're going to be lucky to get any interest rate,
That's
aren't you?
Right.
You're probably not. And that's why, unfortunately, more and more people end up going to payday lenders because they didn't take care of their creddet scores. At credit unions, we try to do everything we can to try to help people, educate them, restore them, and get them back on the right road. But sometimes it's just the credit score is so far beyond repair, and we don't want to see people get to that point.
We're speaking tonight to Shannon Webster, who's the Vice President for Marketing at Town and Country Credit Union of Minot. We're speaking to Kelly Schmidt, the State Treasurer of North Dakota, and Robbie Thompson, the President and CFO of the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. Ms. Webster, one of the things that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that kind of strikes me about young people and finances is it seems that they have much greater access to a credit card, to credit of all kinds than was true maybe 20 or 30 years ago when I was trying to get a credit card and had a really tough time doing it. Now it seems like they hand them out, or at least they used to, like candy. And how does this affect your job when it comes to trying to, or the significance of your job when you're trying to teach your customers financial literacy?
You know, we actually hold a seminar every fall in Minot called Smarts, and we've done it since 2009, where we bring in high school seniors from across the area, and we spend a day teaching them. They go through about 4 or 5 breakout sessions all on financial literacy. And it's high school seniors, so we hear a lot of different answers, and we teach us one course, especially just on credit cards. We call it Is Plastic Really Fantastic? And they talk about how easy it is to get a credit card and that they're already getting offers in the mail or, you know, different things like that. I think it's really easy for them to get access. But that's why, you know, in sessions like that, we can talk to them and say, watch for that small print. You know, interest rates of 22% on a credit card. I mean, that's scary stuff. You know, Treasurer Schmidt talked about it. Those are things that long term have a huge impact and can impact you. I mean, things that you buy now can, you know, have that impact later.
Do the students understand what is the significance of a 22% interest rate?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of fun YouTube videos that we show them during our session where if you buy something now, you could end up paying for it for the next 10 years. You know, is that one-time purchase on your credit card really worth it when you're still paying that interest rate years later? And they see that seems to make sense.
Well, and we have a game in our office that we offer to schools and public libraries that you can play online, or we have the DVD, Financial Football and Financial Soccer. And those are available free of charge, that they can use those to play those games. And they're at different levels, so the folks are learning and they're going through the process and they're doing additional information, and it's great stuff, and they don't realize how much they're learning at the same time.
Yeah, I think people really got to check that out. Shannon actually said to me that before we came on here,
I was playing it before I came.
She did admit that she got a couple wrong. So
what's it like to play? What is it? Could you describe the game to us?
Yeah, it's almost like it's a football game is what it is, and it's actual NFL teams, and you pick your team, and then you pick the team. I picked the Vikings. But
I would pick the Packers.
But so you pick the team you want to play against, and then before you can run a play, you have to answer a financial literacy question. So it was a question about 401ks that I admittedly got wrong, but they still let me play. I just didn't get as many yards as what happened, I think. So,
how do you demonstrate the importance of starting early? Starting saving early.
Well, we try and do that. I think with one of the things that a lot of credit unions do is they have a bank where you actually put money in the little piggy bank, and it shows the differences, and they put it into different slots, and it shows how fast your savings can grow, and they give special interest deals on a lot of them, and it shows how that interest can grow, and that you can do at the youngest age, and I think they really get the idea then that putting money away and putting it someplace where they're not going to spend it really helps them out. So I think that's little things like that can really do. But I mean, the key is when you're teaching 5- and 6-year-olds financial literacy is you got to make it fun.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you know, when we talk about financial literacy, Dale, I think it's important. Not only is it important for kids and young people, it's important for us grown-ups too, because as we work through life, we continue to need to know different things as we're making financial decisions. And so we remember, for us, it's cradle to grave.
We've been speaking this evening to Shannon Webster, the Vice President for Marketing of Town and Country Credit Union of Minot, the State Treasurer of North Dakota, Kelly Schmidt, and the President and Chief Financial Officer of the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, Mr. Robbie Thompson. He represents credit unions in North Dakota and South Dakota.
When we come back from the break, we'll have a couple more guests, and we'll wrap it up at 9 o'clock. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Peacock Alley, where we're with our guest tonight and host Dale Wetzel, talking about the legislature today. We have a couple legislators with us and our state treasurer. So, Dale, we had a busy segment, so take her away there, buddy.
We do indeed. This segment of the legislature today is sponsored by the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, and we have 2 state legislators and the state treasurer of North Dakota on tonight to speak about financial literacy and the credit union's role in promoting the same. We have with us this evening Representative Lisa Meier from Bismarck. She represents a district in South Bismarck. She's a Republican. We have the state treasurer of North Dakota, who was just re-elected last year. Her name is Kelly Schmidt, and she has made financial literacy instruction a primary job of hers in her position as state treasurer. And we have Blair Thorsen, who is a who is one of the guys who's on the committee that spends the dough in the legislature. He is
big
a member
spender
of the House Appropriations Committee.
Well-known big spender.
He is the chairman of a subcommittee called the Government Operations Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee, and what they do is they go through a number of the smaller state offices and state agencies and some of the larger ones as well, pretty much everything except higher ed, Department of Public Instruction, and the higher education system. And Mr. Thorsen is also a sponsor of a financial literacy bill that we're going to be talking about this evening. It requires concepts of personal finance to be taught in high school, or I should say in middle school, at least once during the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. This is House Bill 1217. The primary sponsor of the bill is Representative Roscoe Striley of Bismarck, a Republican from Minot. I think I said Roscoe Striley was from Bismarck. He is from Minot. He's a Republican from Minot. And Blair Thorsen, a Republican from Fargo, is one of the sponsors. Mr. Thorsen, how did you, or why did you put this in, and why do you think it's important?
Well, Representative Striley came to me saying that he was going to be placing this bill in, and we'd had this conversation, I think, at least one other session, perhaps more. The idea of teaching concepts of personal finance to our teenagers and people that are kind of getting into the job market as they start earning money and working to save towards the future. I think it's important to teach them this because obviously we can see throughout our country that we've become a nation where instead of worrying about saving or thinking about the future, we're kind of the here and now generation. I think it's important we tell people who are younger that you need to put away some of your money to plan for your future because the government's not always going to be there for you. There may not be somebody else to bail you out. You have responsibility yourself.
Representative Meier, you're the vice chair of the Education Committee. No, excuse me, I'm sorry.
A member of the Education Committee.
I'm a member on the Education.
You're a member of the Education. I'm sorry.
I see you
promoted her. I see you sitting up front, and I'm thinking, boy, she looks like she's running the show.
Used to be vice chair, though, so thank you.
I'm sorry. Why do you think that this particular piece of legislation is important?
Well, Dale, I think this piece of legislation is so important. You know, I did a little research of what other states have actually passed in the last 2 years, and there's actually over 30 pieces of legislation that I researched and saw that states, the states in our state too are really looking at what students need to be equipped with when they graduate. You're out in the real world, and I think it's like something like 1/3 of our students actually have credit cards. I believe that's what Treasurer Schmidt had said in her testimony, during high school even. So that's alarming, and, they're making important financial decisions. And that's when debt can really start with young people is when they're in high school and college. So I think when they're making those big decisions, it's important for them to be financially responsible.
Treasurer Schmidt, do you have a particular opinion on this legislation as to whether it should be mandatory to teach personal finance during some point in a student's middle school career, or should it be earlier, should it be later, or should it even be compulsory?
Well, a bill was passed in the 2009 legislative session that required a component of financial education to be in the high school curriculum, and was required for graduation. That passed and was implemented in 2010, and the curriculum was developed working with the credit union leagues, the bankers, and all the different folks across the state. I was a part of that group to develop the curriculum. So this is just piggybacking on that, trying to bring some of those more fundamental, basic thoughts as we move into that high school age. And as we talked about in the earlier segment, I mean, our kids are graduating from high school. They've got debt, they've got car loans, they've got things that have stepped forward at a much faster pace than you and I ever thought of. And we need to make sure we're staying ahead of the curve instead of just trying to play catch up.
One of the things that I think kind of plays into this, we have a lot of news and reports and information about college student debt levels when they graduate from college. And you have folks who are graduating from college with $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 in debt or even more. Basically, they have the equivalent of a home mortgage when they almost a home mortgage when they get out of college. And how important is it that they grasp right away the significance of taking on that much debt for a college education, and how that should factor into the analysis of whether it's worth it or whether they're borrowing too much money or whether they should try to work things a bit differently?
Well, I think the biggest thing that they have to understand, and that the colleges are teaching them too, is that that bill is just as big as the mortgage, and they're just as responsible for it as they were for a mortgage. But not only is it important as they graduate, but 40% of the people that drop out of college drop out because of financial related reasons. So that's even putting more emphasis on the need to have education relating to high school and in that earlier age.
Representative Meier, to what extent does this sort of instruction go on in the home, and is there less of it perhaps than there used to be?
You know, Dale, I think that, you know, parents are busy, and I think that, you know, most of the time in the home, you know, you have two working parents or one working parent, single parent household, and you know, I think sometimes in the home, I know certainly with my son when he was growing up, I probably didn't pay as much attention to, you know, what he knew financially about financial literacy, even though he works in a credit union now, which is great. But he was always very responsible. And, you know, kids get jobs at young ages and they start working. And I think that once they start working, they realize that they can buy bigger things. And I think sometimes that's where it starts to get a little carried away, is, you know, you buy a car and there's repairs and there's gas and everything that goes along with that. So I think that's where it starts to escalate. And I think sometimes, you know, parents just don't realize, you know, aren't paying enough attention to actually, you know, what type of expenses their kids are getting into. Or until they come to mom and dad and say, you know what, here's some bills and I need a little help.
One of the things that I've heard of, and I don't know to what extent that this is practiced that widely, but I understand that parents are letting their children be authorized users of their own credit cards, and particularly if the parents have good credit, they can help their children establish good credit. But on the other hand, you're probably taking a little risk there by putting a credit card in the hands of a teenager without the responsibility of paying it off.
I think you're taking quite a bit of risk. It's like handing them the keys to that car when they're 15 years old and say, here you go, drive across the state, have a good time.
You know what we've done in our household, because as we all know, having no credit is as bad as having poor credit. So when they open that first checking account, what we did is put on a $200 ready reserve line for them, so that maybe they advance $50, they keep it out, they pay it back over 2 paychecks or whatever, so that they're learning to be responsible, and it's showing up on that FICO score as we talked about earlier, and they're developing some credit. But helping them and understanding that is important to the whole process. You know, even sending them to your insurance agent when they get their driver's license to see the consequences of a bad FICO score or having that first accident, and how it affects how much they're going to pay for the premium on that car they're going to have.
Yeah, they're going to find out the consequences of being 16 years old, I think, when you're talking about car insurance.
Absolutely.
I was kind of debating whether to bring this up, and I guess I will. To what extent do you think young people are influenced, if they're influenced at all, by all of the news they hear about the massive federal debt and how much the federal government is in debt, and also about bank bailouts? I mean, because I'm working from the thesis that these two things might tend to reinforce the idea that there are somewhat limited consequences to financial irresponsibility.
Well, I'll jump in here. I think during the last campaign that we went through, I talked with a lot of the students in the college level, so a little bit older than the group we're talking about here, but there was a huge concern about that. They realize that it's their generation that's going to have to pay these bills at some point, or perhaps their children in a few years. So I have to think that if they have that sentiment now, they probably started getting it when they were in high school. They see the mess that our nation is in. They understand that those bills have to get paid at some point, and if not, we're in dire situations. So I would think that probably starting at a younger and younger age, people are getting a sense that we have to be more responsible, we have to cover the costs that we've incurred, and if not, it's game over.
You know, Blair, I'm kind of guessing too that kids are always going to be kids, and when they're in junior high and high school, you know, they're out shopping and buying clothing and buying things for their cars, and you know, they're not really paying that much attention to, unless they're hearing a lot about what's going on in the federal scene in their schools. I'm kind of guessing when they're in grade school and high school, you know, you see kids down at the malls, and clothes are expensive, and eating out is expensive, and so I'm kind of guessing when they're in grade school and high school, they're probably not paying as much attention to.
I think it depends on the kid.
I think it depends on the kid.
We've got 3 savers and 1 spender, and one of the savers was not a saver at one time until he learned from the School of Hard Knocks, and now he's come to a realization that life is just a little bit easier when you do
And the
things.
way our world is going, the 3 savers will have to pay off the 1 spender at some point.
Well, I'm hoping that there's
Not
going to be a
your
revelation for him soon, too.
What do you think the chances are that the legislature will adopt an idea of making personal finance instruction a requirement in middle school in North Dakota?
I can jump in on this. I think this time, Dale, we'll probably look at, you know, some of the questions that came up is whether or not we need to have a 9-week course for financial literacy, or if it needs to be integrated into a math course or another course, you know, on economics. So that right now we're kind of looking into it. We really haven't. We dialogued somewhat on the bill the other day, but we haven't really talked everything through. So I am putting my bet that we're going to do something with financial literacy with that middle school level this session. Whether or not it's going to be integrated into that math includes elements of financial literacy is what I would guess. Or another subject would include some type of elements of financial literacy, or if there needs to be a 9-week course taught on financial literacy. That's sort of the discussion right now of what the Education Committee is having.
What do you think the sentiment is, Blair?
Talking to people, I think that there's an understanding that we really need to push this more. I do want to give credit where credit's due. The Treasurer has been working on this. There are institutions, obviously, the credit unions, who we've talked about earlier this evening, and the other financial institutions are also putting forward, you know, an effort to do this. I think that, you know, there may have been some hesitation in the past saying that 9 weeks is too long, but I really believe that maybe this is the opportunity we have to say this is a piece that we need to give to our young people going forward, like a driver's ed. Maybe we need some financial ed so that when we metaphorically give them the checkbook or the credit card, they have that extra piece there along with what they've learned at home to make sound decisions into their future.
Treasurer Schmidt, do you have any feel for whether the legislature is willing to take this step?
I think we're going to see some action, like Representative Meier indicated. And I think that one of the really important parts is, you know, whether you're a laborer or you're a professional, you know, a doctor, it doesn't matter how much money you're making. It doesn't matter if you're a college graduate or a high school graduate. You still need the main principles of what's going to be taught. And that's something that's going to carry you on for the rest of your life.
When we talk about financial literacy and in the instruction of young people, what could you all talk about what are the elements of it? I mean, how deep does it go? I mean, do you talk about the stock market? Do you talk about bonds versus stocks? Do you talk about investing? Do you talk about debt ratios? I mean, how sophisticated does this become in terms of speaking about financial literacy? Are we talking about just, you know, describing what a checkbook is, what a credit card is, what a debit card is, the differences between the two, the importances of budgeting? Or do we go further than that and talk about, you know, investing for retirement, or what a 401k is, what a Roth IRA is, that kind of thing?
Well, I believe the most important thing is how it's defined in the law as it relates to, are we talking 9-week clocks, or are we talking incorporating it into something else? And so that indeed it determines how much is going to be used and how far we're going to go. But just getting down to the principles of basic finance is where I think they would start at the middle school level and then carry that through. But young people are very interested in how to make their money grow, and they're very interested in the stock market, and they're interested in learning some of those things. And discussion about credit card debt, how a credit card works and the impact of that interest, all those different components are part of the process, and I think they all need to be taught.
You mentioned they're curious about the stock market. Are they afraid of the stock market, for want of a better term?
I've never seen anything that's recorded as being afraid.
Okay.
And I've heard in some classrooms they actually do what's called a stock market game, and they actually play the stock market for, maybe for perhaps maybe 3 weeks to a month, and they do more of a game of it. And I think it's a great opportunity for kids to kind of dabble a little bit, and of course there's going to be winners and losers, and kids are competitive, so I think it's an exciting way for them to realize and learn a little bit about the stock market.
I can attest firsthand to that. We got to do that when I was in school many, many years ago. I had an instructor who I think was kind of on the forefront. He gave us a mock checking account and said, here's $1,000. You have 2 weeks to make it grow. And I remember this was in the days where you had to go to the newspaper each day to see where the stocks went. Now, obviously, it's instantaneous on your handheld device or some other way. But you get to see, there's risk involved, obviously, but you have to learn to live with that risk. But for the long term, your money is going to grow. So that was a great tool, and I think we need to push that more.
Do any of you know the extent to which other states require instruction in financial literacy for their young people?
The majority of states do offer financial literacy from a very young age all the way through high school. I don't have the current number because it's been changing quite dramatically. And in the middle school curriculum especially, it's been changing dramatically. But the last number I heard, it was 32 states for high school.
So more than 32?
And Kelly, you touch upon a really important note. There's all kinds of financial literacy. I have kind of a list right here. There's a ton of states that have actually passed different pieces of legislation over the last 2 years. One thing that really caught my mind, I was looking at Utah had passed legislation a couple of years ago called Utah Saves Week, and what they do is they do a ton of advertising towards consumer, like for example for consumer protection. Different groups get together, such as the credit union, Jumpstart, all the different groups, entities. Kelly, you can probably touch on that a little bit of what North Dakota would actually have, but these groups get together and they actually put towards a huge effort towards educating the public, whether or not they be in grade school, high school, or adults, on what entities are out there to get the public involved in all the important consumer information. And, let's say, for example, if you're buying a house, what type of information is out there if you're interested in buying a house, and how do you even begin to start to look into that?
To what extent do the financial institutions, like the credit unions, the banks, play a role in financial literacy instruction?
They're very influential and they're very, very involved. There's so many resources that they bring to the table in that cooperative effort to accomplish the goal. The Jumpstart Coalition was an organization that I am one of the original founding members, and it was the effort of that group to bring all these entities together, whether it's a speaking bureau that we provide for teachers who want to bring in a speaker to come in and teach a class on credit card, or if it's an opportunity to talk about college savings or 529 plans like the Bank of North Dakota offers. It's an opportunity to bring all those different pieces in, and there are many, many different public-private partnerships that are being done across the state and across the country.
You mentioned the Jumpstart program. What is that?
The Jumpstart Coalition is a coalition of folks that have a vested interest in helping our young people and our aged people, cradle to grave, in their efforts to learn more about finances. And we do this as a coalition. It's a national coalition. Most states have a state coalition, which unifies all those pieces together just so that we can cooperatively work.
And what sort of, aside from expertise, do they teach classes? Do they offer instructional materials, or what do they bring?
We offer instructional materials. We have a clearinghouse of information that's available, and most of it's free of charge to teachers or whoever wants to do it. We provide the speakers bureaus. We send teachers to educational opportunities at a national convention in Washington, D.C. There's just so many opportunities through the Jumpstart Coalition.
Representative Meier, I want you and Representative Thorsen to discuss how have you benefited from financial literacy in your own adult lives? How has it played a role in helping you live your life better? Or
well, as I'll jump in again. As I said, I had an opportunity as a very young age to have kind of a financial literacy type course through the idea of learning how to properly spend money with a mock checking account and investing money. I think part of that was also taught at home, as we talked about earlier, where my parents were very thoughtful in the fact that they sat us down and said, here's what you need to do to look towards the future. So whether it's in the public school education setting or in the home setting, I felt like I had a pretty sound financial background. Now, does that mean I made perfect choices through life? Absolutely not. But at least you can reflect back on what it is you were taught. And I would hope that through legislation like this or other efforts through institutions that we teach the younger generation what it is we can do to have them prepare properly for the future.
Good points, Blair. And I can tell you, Dale, personally, I know that I grew up in a household that was very frugal, and so at a very responsible younger age, I guess I was in high school, I had first received my taken out a checking account and learned to budget, and sort of followed those habits all the way through college, and moved shortly after college. Had moved to Minneapolis for a while, and when I was on my own, I realized that debt can occur and pretty quickly, and so I decided that just to really practice my good habits of growing up and how frugal our household was, to really try to, do I really need it, or is it something that I can do without? And I guess I've tried to follow that throughout my life so far, and have tried to be responsible. And I think that's probably the theme of what we're wanting to look at for young people is we're wanting to teach them to be responsible at a younger age, so that it carries them all the way through their high school years and college years, and when they get to be adults, and seek out information of what they need. They can be taught this at an early age, and then continue to seek the information out so they can continue to be responsible and make good decisions.
I'm just thinking about how much easier it is these days to spend money, because you have oodles of internet sites.
That's
and
right.
A credit card, and you can just...
It used to be you had to get in your car and drive somewhere and spend that money. Now you can reach down in your pocket, pull out a device, and literally spend hundreds of dollars in minutes ordering products or downloading applications or whatever it might be.
Or you could be playing Texas Hold'em poker or something like that, and spending money that way. We've been talking this evening with Representative Lisa Meier of Bismarck. She's a Republican, represents a district in South Bismarck. We have State Treasurer Kelly Schmidt, who was just reelected to her position last year. And we have Representative Blair Thorsen, who is the chairman of a House Appropriations Subcommittee on Government Operations, which means that his subcommittee rides herd on a number of state agencies and how much they spend. And he is a Republican from Fargo.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight down at Peacock Alley. This is Legislature Today. This wraps up this session.